Thank you.
Right. Good morning, everybody. Wonderful to get together, learn a bit of Torah together in Eretz Yisrael. What could be nicer than that? If you remember last week, spoke about various different topics, but we're still with Adam and Chava, and we're trying to get a bit of a deeper understanding of some of the material in Sefer Bereshis and see how it affects our lives directly. Because, of course, the description, and here's the most important point, really, the guiding principle of the whole of the study of the first couple of chapters of Bereshis, and that is that the story of the creation of Adam and Chava is really the way the Torah has of teaching us about human nature. In other words, when it speaks about Adam and Chava, the relationship between them, and the things they got right and the things they got wrong, it's talking about then what is human nature and how we are supposed to understand ourselves and what sort of strengths and weaknesses the human being has. And all this is really, that's what it's about. It's not meant to be an ancient story, not just meant to be an ancient story about the original ancestors of mankind, but it is it's really a deeper insight into human nature and the strengths of an individual and the relationship between Adam and Chava. I think I've said a few times before already, but it's worth mentioning already here, that actually when we count the years of the Jewish calendar, right, that we're now, right, Tofshin Pei Gimel, right, 783, these are years that we are counting, which are not counting from Bereshis Bara Elokim. We're not counting the years from the moment God started creating the universe. We actually don't know really the years between where we are now and the creation of the universe. The Torah tells us about 6 days of creation, but according to many of the Meforshim and according to, I think, the Seichel HaYashar, the 6 days of creation would easily have been 6 years, 6 million years, 6 billion years. It actually makes no difference. The Torah is not about natural history. That's not what it's about. It's about the development of the human being. And really, if you like, it's the history of the neshama, of the spiritual dimension of the human being. And that history dates back 5,783 years to the creation of Adam and Chava. Right? There could have, before that, there could easily have been lots of dinosaurs and billions of years of primordial men of various sorts. There could easily have been all sorts of different creatures around, but something happened 5,783 years ago, which brought into being a different type of creature that had ever existed before that. Before that, there was the solar system and the galaxies and all of nature, but there wasn't a neshama. The neshama is the consciousness of the human being, which is able to discern values, relationships, and ultimately able to discern the presence of God in this world. And that is really what happened with the creation of Adam and Chava. And that's important to remember that. You know, because people say, well, age of the universe, the Torah is anti-scientific. It's all nonsense. The Torah is not in the least bit anti-scientific. On the contrary, the Torah really is giving us just a different dimension. Science can describe the age of the universe, and that's fine. I've got no problem with any different datings. I think the latest dating is something like 13.5 billion years ago, but these things change all the time. Within 10 years, it'll be a different number. They discover different galaxies and different levels of radiation and all sorts of different ways of discerning the Bereshis. Nobody was around at Bereshis Bara Elokim, you understand? So it's all a question of calculating backwards. But it doesn't matter. The truth is it's totally irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant to the story of the Torah and to the message the message of the Torah. The message of the Torah is to teach us about the uniqueness of man and woman and the dignity and the ruchnius and the bechira, the freedom of choice, all these elements which are unique to the human being. This is the unique message of the Torah, which the truth is, in certain respects, even the non-Jewish world and the secular world have absorbed certain basic values of, say, the sanctity of life. Right? No culture views human life on par with animal life. It's clear in the universe, in mankind, except for a few lunatics, that human life and animal life are they might look similar on a superficial level, but actually are totally incommensurable and coming from different places entirely. So we're going to look at today a little bit more, something we haven't looked at yet, on the creation of man and woman. Remember, last year I had a bit of technological problems. I couldn't share any texts with you, but this year I think we're back in the saddle, and the technology is working once again. Of course, as soon as you say that, something happens. But I'm hoping that won't be the case. So let me see if we can share a text with you. Okay. Ellie, you see a text? Yes, good, excellent. Thank you, Ellie, thank you. So I'd like to focus a little bit on probably one of the most mysterious aspects of the story of Adam and Chava, and that is, you can see the title of the sheet in front of you, The Forbidden Fruit in Gan Eden. So first of all, we don't know what fruit it was, and that's a whole different story. All different midrash, about 5 or 6 different midrashim suggesting what type of fruit it was. In the Christian culture, simply because of certain artists, it's considered an apple. And the Apple computer with a bite taken out of it is meant to be in some way the icon of the Apple Incorporated is intended to be a connection to the Eitz Hadas, but in actual fact that has no basis at all in Jewish texts. Does anybody know what the suggestions are of what the fruit might have been? Is anything recognizable to us? Anybody know?
Esrog.
An esrog, yes. Thank you, Phil. According to one interpretation, it is an esrog, and I'm going to show you where that comes from. Actually, in the text, there is a reference to the esrog. Anybody? Any other ideas? And there's a suggestion that it's figs, because later on they take a fig leaf to clothe themselves with, and the fig leaf, which is the initial clothing of Adam and Eve, is connected to the Aveira itself of eating from the Eitz Hadas. But let's have a look first at a few basic issues here. So we already looked at some of this, but let's have a look. I want to show you here a Rashi and a Gemara, which is very interesting on this word. We mentioned it last time, but we didn't get a chance to look at the Chazal on it. So the Pasuk when it speaks about the creation of man, it uses uniquely this word vayitzer. And vayitzer comes, of course, from the word tsayar, to create, to make something new, right? Yetzira, right? Yetzira is the act of creation. But here, uniquely, it's written with 2 yuds. And that is seen by Chazal to be very evocative and to somehow give us an insight into this creation. Because he could have said, Vayotzar Hashem Elokim es ha'adam. Grammatically, that would have been the correct thing to say. Vayotzar, he created. So why Vayitzer? Okay, so I want to show you 2 different angles on this, one in Rashi and one in the Gemara. So Rashi says something very interesting. Rashi says, Vayitzer, she says, Shtei Yitziros. Like HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the very beginning created the human being, that the human being can exist on two different levels completely. Yetzira la'olam hazeh, v'yetzira l'tchias hamesim. This is a very interesting. Suddenly, Rashi is introducing an idea which we haven't heard of before in the Chumash, and which relates completely to the final redemption, the final Geula, Yemos HaMashiach, that actually there is something called Tchias HaMesim. The Rashi says, the double U doesn't appear in the creation of any of the animals because they are not connected to Tchias HaMesim. So let's just speak about this for 1 second. What could Rashi possibly mean? That one Yetzirah for this world and one Yetzirah for Tchias HaMesim. What could Rashi possibly have in mind? So it depends a little bit how we understand Tchias HaMesim, because Tchias HaMesim is, in a sense, one of the most mysterious aspects of our emunah, but it nevertheless, undoubtedly, is one of the articles of faith, of Torah, of Yiddishkeit. So much so that the second bracha of every Shemona Esrei, we say 365 days a year, is Baruch Atah Hashem Machaya HaMesim. In other words, it's an article of faith which is endorsed and expressed every time we get up to daven, right? Makayim emunoso lisheinei ofar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu fulfills his promise lisheinei ofar, to those who are in the dust, meaning buried, but they're only sleeping. The fact that it uses the word yeshenim, which means sleeping, implies that they're sleeping and will one day wake up again, right? And in actual fact, this phrase, Yeshenei Ofar, is a quote from the Tanakh. I don't expect anyone to know where in the Tanakh we find the phrase Yeshenei Ofar speaking about Tchias HaMesim, but the answer is the last chapter of the book of Daniel, right? The book of Daniel is probably the best source, really, for text which deals with Achris Hayomim, deals with the Messianic era. Daniel has visions, and those visions are translated into different coded forms of understanding what's going to happen in the Messianic era. How did Daniel know this? So you have to read the book of Daniel. Ladies and gentlemen, homework for you between now and next Tuesday. Get out a translated Tanakh. Sit down for half an hour. That's it. Sit down for half an hour and read through the English translation of the book of Daniel, just to get the plot and to get the ideas. Oh dear. Just 1 second. You see, there was I saying I'm not going to have any IT problems, and I'm just being told that my battery is running low and about to shut down any second. So forgive me for 1 second, just to see if I can deal with that.
You see, HaKadosh Baruch Hu also created gremlins when it came to computers, obviously to Yitzirot.
That's right, Michael. The two yuds with a computer. One is the battery, and one is when it's plugged in. These are two different life sources for the computer. And I didn't remember that I actually was running off battery. But there we are. We're plugged in now, and Baruch Hashem, all is well. So so 1 second. Yes, I was speaking about very briefly. I mean, this is a subject for a whole shir, of course, but the concept of Tchias HaMesim, which for the Rambam in his 13 Animamins is number 13, in fact, the last one. And as you know, the Ani Ma'amins of the Rambam are the basis for the 13 verses of Yigdal Elohim Chai. So the last phrase of Yigdal is Meisim Yechaye El B'Rav Chazdoi Baruch Hadayad Shein Tilasa. That is the reference to Tchias HaMeisim. But what exactly it means is mysterious. The truth is it's mysterious. The main source, as I said, is Daniel chapter 12, the final chapter of Daniel. And there you find the phrase that the Yeshene offer, that those who have been buried will one day come back again. Now, what's interesting about this is the idea that the idea of, to borrow a Christian word, the idea of resurrection. Right? Resurrection is a word which has got lots of Christian overtones to it, but actually they didn't invent the word resurrection. We invented it, and that's Tchias HaMeisim. The idea that the Meisim will return once again into this world, and that's part of our vision of Yemos HaMashiach. It's very hard for us to understand it completely, but nevertheless, we say it repeatedly in our davening. We, for example, say, right, in the morning, we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for having restored to us our neshama. Atav rosa, ati yitzata, ata nafachtabi, v'ata osed litla mimeni. You will, in fact, take the neshama away from me when the body and soul separate from each other at the point of death. Ula hachaziro bila osid lover. And they're going to get back together again later on. Right? We refer constantly to the idea of Tchias HaMeisim, the idea that a human being comprises of a neshama and a guf, and the neshama and the guf have actually got one mode of existence where they are existing jointly. That's the world that we live in today, the neshama and the guf. But they have another mode of existence where they're existing separately, where they exist separately, right? Where the guf has parted from the body, the guf has parted from the neshama goes to Olam Haba, goes to Olam HaNeshamas. The guf is buried, but it will be resurrected in a certain sense. I must tell you, just by the way, I was discussing this many years ago in a Shia, and in the Shia there were several scientists, and scientists often contribute interesting angles to Torah learning. Everybody contributes interesting things, but so this scientist says to me, the whole idea of Tchias HaMeisim, the idea of the body is coming back to life, must have been, throughout Jewish history, something totally inconceivable, something completely incredible and inconceivable, and it was accepted as an item, as an article of faith, part of our Yesodi Hadat. But actually, he says, nowadays, we know that even though the body after death is decomposed and disintegrated, and sometimes even chas v'shalom burnt or blown up or something, all you need is one single cell of the body contains all the DNA information for the body to come back to exist again. Within one cell, whether it's a hair cell or a skin cell or a brain cell or a muscle cell, doesn't matter. Any single cell of the human being contains within it the potential, like a seed contains the potential of a tree in the seed. Every cell is a DNA, the complete information for the body to come back to life again. So therefore, the idea of, if you want to translate Tchias HaMeisim into a bit more of something imaginable, every person who has died, actually, even though the body has disintegrated, there is somewhere in the world, somewhere in the earth, somewhere, there is a single cell of that person. And that single cell has got the potential to bring that particular guf back to life again, and then to be recombined with the neshama, and that is Tchias HaMeisim. And that's an amazing idea. If we think about that just for a few minutes, that really makes the whole of Tchias HaMeisim, brings it just a little bit closer to our sense of reality. It's not a complete, totally extraterrestrial magic event. It has some basis in biology. And it's possible, why am I mentioning this here? because it's possible that that's Pshat in Rashi here. What did Rashi say here? Let's kind of, now that we've gone through this, let's have another look in Rashi. This is just my personal take on Rashi. So Rashi here said to us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created Shtei Yetziros. Well, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu created two Yudim. He created two ways of creating man. One is Yitzir Olam Hazeh, with his body and soul together. And one is a Yitzir Olam Hazeh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created man from the very beginning, that the human body is able to leave the neshama, disintegrate, but still maintain within one cell, maintain its tzura, maintain its format, and therefore can be cloned and bring back to life at some later date. It's a very exciting and interesting, a very, very interesting idea. I mentioned here in this Shia, I think it was last year, if I'm not mistaken, a video that I saw on YouTube about an Israeli scientist who managed to find some date seeds. Remember that? Date pits. You must look it up if you can. In Masada, they found a whole jug full of date pits, which of course the fruit had all disintegrated, but the pits are very strong, very hard. And of course, it had been through 2,000 years of the heat of Masada, so it was baked into a solid bits of rock. But inside the date seed, there still is the potential for creating a date palm. And what's interesting is that the date palms we have in Israel today are not the ancient Judean dates. They're actually Greek dates. They're not the actual dates which Chazal speak about. Was a different strain, a different type of date, and they wanted to try and grow it. And this institute for agriculture in the desert, there was this woman scientist. She cultivated these dates and got them to grow again, brought out and actually grew some date palms, and grew for the first time some of the dates which are exactly the same as the dates that David HaMelech ate and Shlomo HaMelech ate and Avraham Avinu ate in Israel, right? In the ancient world, those dates which had become extinct, they weren't completely extinct. Those seeds in Masada, she did a type of Tchias HaMeisim of these seeds and made them sprout again, and has in fact already brought a harvest. Brought a harvest of these new dates, which are bigger and they taste different. Interestingly enough, in the video, we saw one man eating the very first date of the very first crop of this tree, of this ancient type of Judean date, and he made a bar priya eitz, and then he made a shechianu. Was a man with a kippah, he bit into it, and he said, his first remark was, it tastes of honey, which is very interesting because the Torah uses the word dvash to refer to dates. And it has been remarked that the dates that we are familiar with do not taste like honey. But these ancient Judean species of dates, they do taste like honey. Right? In the posuk which speaks about the Shiva Minim, right? Eretz Chitos Sa'ora, the Gefirot Ein of a Ribon, Eretz Zeis Shemen Udvash. Right? The last word in the seven, and listing the 7 species of Israel, the last word is Dvash, and Dvash means honey, but actually here it means dates. Right? But the dates of the ancient world tasted like honey. And why am I speaking all about this? Because in my mind, this was a sort of a microcosm of Tchias HaMeisim. Microcosm of these tiny date seeds, which had been really completely desiccated and dehydrated and subjected to intense heat, literally for over 2,000 years, right? And you would have thought they looked like a piece of rock. Honestly, when you see them in the film, they look like a bit of a stone. There's nothing there which looks in the least bit like it could have any life to it, but it contained within it the DNA of those date trees. And with a little bit of cultivating, or maybe a lot of cultivating, I don't know how she did it exactly, she soaked it and added minerals and whatever it was, brought back to life. So all this, ladies and gentlemen, is in the Rashi, which is highlighted in the screen in front of you. Now, when Adam and Chava were created, they were created by Yitzer, 2 yuds, says Rashi, 2 yuds means shtei yitzirot. That's what Rashi says. Yeah, these words, I like these words, shtei yitzirot. And actually, there were 2 creations here. One was a creation, in fact, to live in this world, body and soul together. And one was a creation, that even after the body disintegrates, it should be revivable through the use of a single cell. A single cell. And there is a Gemara which says, actually, which speaks about this. Does anybody know what the Gemara says? The Gemara says there is one small, the Gemara says a bone in the human body, which even though the body disintegrates or is burnt or destroyed or whatever it is, that bone is indestructible. Anybody remember the name of that? Okay, the Gemara says, interestingly enough, that this is a little part of the body which the Gemara calls a luz, Lamed Bob Zion. The luz, right, is a little tiny speck in the human body, which everything in the body is destructible except for this. This is indestructible. It can't be destroyed. And the Gemara sort of metaphorically says that the Seudah of Shabbos and Melava Malka somehow nurtures that luz, that part of the human, of the body that can't be destroyed. That the neshama can't be destroyed, that is taken as read. But the body seems to be a physical object which is finite and can be destroyed, and that's true except for one particle. And that one particle is the basis of Tchias HaMesim, and that's Rashi. Okay, I'm not going to spend more time on this. Tchias HaMesim is indeed a subject we could talk about for a long time. But if you do have some time, read the book of Daniel. Read the book of Daniel, and particularly the last chapter, and you will see that. Okay, so here, the next source that I've got for you, which I find fascinating, is the Gemara in Brachas, Samach Aleph. The Gemara in Brachas has got a different perush on this word Vayitzer. We're still with this particular, this one word, right? So Rashi, so the Gemara here says, I don't know why Rashi doesn't bring this Gemara, but he doesn't. The Gemara says, Dorash of Nachor Bayitzchak. My dichsiv. What does it mean by Yitzeh Hashem Elokim es ha'adam b'shnei yudin? What does it mean that the Torah uses 2 yuds in the creation of man and woman? So the Gemara gives the answer, Shnei Yitzorim. There's a play on words here, that the word Vayitzer means HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, but the word Vayitzer also relates to the word Yetzer, as in there are 2 Yitzorim in the human being, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu created Echad Yetzer HaTov, the Echad Yetzer Hara. Now the human being was created from the beginning with a Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer Hara, meaning he's driven in different directions. Within the human being, there are drives which are positive, drives to moral and spiritual life, to generosity and altruism and love and kindness. That's the Yetzer HaTov. And then there is the Yetzer Hara, which is the drive towards egoism and selfishness and violence and the dark side, shall we say, of human nature. The dark side of human nature is what Chazal call the Yetzer Hara. But what's interesting is the Gemara in Brachas sees in the word Vayitzer already a remez to these 2 Yitzorim. Chazal actually used the word Yetzer. Why does it use the word Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer Hara? What is Yetzer? Why the Yetzer? So you could say, well, actually it means that a person is driven to create. Yetzer comes from the word Yetzira, to create. So a person is able to create, but he can choose. He can either create create buildings and create a society and create a family and create a positivity in this world, or chas v'shalom, the opposite. He can create an atom bomb. He can create destructiveness and disaster and illness. So the creativity of the human being is not necessarily a positive power. It can go either way. People speak about creativity as if it is by definition something positive. The truth is, there are lots of evil people who are extremely creative in their evil pursuits, right? So creativity itself is not something to be welcomed unless it is somehow harnessed to a value system. Once there's a value system which tells you what's the difference, what is the positivity, then Yetzirah works well. And this word Yetzer is found in Chazal. I just want to bring you one of the most famous places where the word Yetzer is, and this is the Mishnah in Avos. So the Mishnah here in Pirkei Avos, chapter 4, just learn with you for 2 minutes. Because this Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, I remember discussing this Mishnah in Pirkei Avos actually with Rabbi Jonathan Sachs many years ago. I've got lots of memories of discussions we had together. He often came as a guest speaker to Mary Yisrael, to our shul. And we used to talk together and discuss things together. And he was particularly fascinated by this Mishnah. This Mishnah talks about 4 different great qualities of a human being. One is a chacham, that he's a wise man. One is a gibor, that he's a powerful person. One is an oshir, he's a wealthy person. And one is mechubad, he's a respected person. These are really possibly the 4 most desired qualities that a person aspires to. And the Gemara each time asks, Eizehu chacham, Eizehu gibor, Eizehu oshir, Eizehu mechubad, who would we call a chacham? And what's interesting is each one of these answers is the opposite of what you might have thought, right? Counterintuitive, opposite of what you would think. You would think a chacham is somebody who has massive wisdom, and because he's got massive wisdom, he teaches everybody. He's a great source of knowledge, and is a great source of wisdom for everybody else. Says the Mishnah here, look at this, the original thing, Eizehu chacham. What is the definition of a chacham for us? So he says, Halomeid mikol adam. Not who teaches everybody, but who can learn from everybody. So in a sense, it's exactly the opposite of what you might have thought. This Mishnah gets us to think a bit more deeply about what these qualities are. So the chacham is not necessarily someone who teaches everybody, but he's always learning. He's always in a learning mode, in a self-improvement mode, and wherever he is, he can learn, he can grow from learning from other people. The pasuk in Tehillim, Mikol Malamdai Hiskalti. When David HaMelech says, I gained knowledge, Mikol Malamda, from all those who taught me. From all those who taught me. So this is the first one, but that's not the one that I'm looking at in terms of the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer HaTov. That's the next one. The next one is the Mishnah says, Ezehu Gibor. Ezehu Gibor. Who is a man, who is a person, a man or a woman of Gevurah? What do we call Gevurah? Is strength. So normally we would call somebody who's strong, somebody who's able, or who's got power. Power means to be able to control the world, control other people, right? To control one's environment, to control the outside world, and to be in power over a nation, over a group of people. That's a gibor. That's somebody of great power. And Chazal say exactly the opposite. What is real gevura? Gevura is hakovesh es yitzra. So here Chazal used the word yetzer in the way that the Gemara understands by Yitzah Hashem Elokim, that he gave us a Yetzer Hara, gave us a strong, you might say, ego drive, a selfish drive, a negative drive in a person, and he's able, he's able to overcome his own Yetzer Hara, and brings a pasuk in Mishlei. So where you might have thought the Gibor is someone who can control others, actually the Gibor is someone who can control himself. Self-control and self-discipline and the ability not to give in to the more egoistic and base drives of the person. That's the Gibor. So in actual fact, but I just wanted to show you this to remind you that actually the word Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Hatov is used frequently in the Torah, but it comes from Bereshis chapter 2, Vayitzer Hashem Elohim. And that goes back to the point I made at the beginning of the shir today, that this entire description of the creation of man, you might say, well, why do we need to know? Well, why is it so important? The Torah goes into such great detail. Creation of man, creation of woman, Gan Eden, Eitz Hadas. The answer is, it's not talking about history. It's talking about a deeper insight into human potential, human nature, into you and me, and into the challenges of that the Torah gives us in reaching our full potential. Again, the next one is also counterintuitive. The next one is Ezehu Oshir, who is a rich person. So you might say a rich person is someone who has a lot, right? Who has amassed a lot of wealth. And he says, no, Ezehu Oshir has somech bechelke. That with what he has, he rejoices with that which is his, and is not somebody who has a massive amount, but somebody who is able to enjoy that which is his and not always obsessed with what he hasn't got, right? That he's actually focusing on what he has got rather than what he hasn't. And the last one is also the paradoxical, right? Ezeu Mechubad, who is a respectable person. Second. Who is somebody who is Mechubad? What's the definition of someone who's Mechubad? Answer, you might say Mechubad means somebody who society respects, that he gets a lot of cover from people. So the answer the Chazal say is exactly the opposite. Ezeu Mechubad hamachabed et habriot. Someone who gives cover to other people. That is the Mechubad. So here you have the four possibly greatest human qualities that people aspire to: Chochmah, Gevura, Osha, and Kovod, and all of them Chazal turn upside down. This mission is a famous paradoxical. That's why Jonathan Sachs liked it, because he loved paradoxes. All philosophers like paradoxes, right? So this is a paradox, means it's the opposite of what one might have thought. A man of wisdom is not a man who teaches, but a man who learns. A man of Gevura is not someone who controls others, but he controls himself. Osher means not that he's got a lot, but that what he has is precious to him. And Mechubad means someone not only who receives kavod, but who gives kavod. And all this is very thought-provoking, and really Chazal giving us maybe a deeper appreciation of human nature. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Let's move on a little bit and get into this mysterious issue of the Eitz Hadas. So Pasuk says as follows. Now we're back to the Psukim in Bereshis chapter 2, right? Pasuk in Bereshis chapter 2 reads, Vayita, he planted. Vayita Hashem Elokim Gan Ba'eden Mikadem, he planted this area which is called Gan Eden, right? Eden is the name of the place, and the Gan is the garden. Why a garden? Why Eden? There was an enormous amount of material on the Gan Eden. It's very evocative, midrashic material. But it says that by Yosem Shom as Adam Asher Yotza, and the human being that he created, he placed in Gan Eden. So the human being starts his life in Gan Eden, and Gan Eden is the closest you get in the Tanakh for a reference to what we would call today in English utopia. It's a perfect world. It's a world in which there are no negativities, no destruction, right? It's a perfect world where God lives in harmony, where man lives in harmony with the earth, and he lives in harmony with God, and he lives in harmony with himself. Everything is working absolutely fine, and he's in Gan Eden. That is Gan Eden. Is the image we have of perfect harmony. And indeed, Gan Eden is used as a synonym for Olam Haba. When we speak about Olam Haba, the neshama, when it leaves this world, goes into a blissful spiritual state, which is Chazal called Olam Haba, but sometimes referred to as Gan Eden. More about that some other time. But what's interesting here is that within Gan Eden, in the story here, famously, it says, Vayatzmach Hashem Elokim minhu Adama kol eitz nechmod lamare v'tov lamach. HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates trees. Right. And it's interesting what it says about these trees. These trees are not only tov lamachal, they're not only good food for the human being, they're also nechmad lamare. And this turns out to be a problematic issue. What does nechmad lamare mean? And he offers on the word nechmad lamare. And he offers on what nechmad lamare means.
Appealing to sight, appealing.
Okay, that's a good idea. Nechmad is appealing. Appealing comes from the word chemda. Right? Chemda actually is a bit of a stronger word in Hebrew than just appealing. Right? We speak about Eretz Chemda Tova Rechava, about Eretz Yisrael. It's desire. Chemda means desire. Right? It is a synonym for ta'ava, for desire. So Chemda means very desirable. And lamare, as you said correctly, means to the sight. In other words, when you look at it, you're immediately struck by its desirable look, right? It has an external desirable look, and it's also tov l'machal. It also has some value, nutritious and value, right? So this is the general context, which we'll come back to in a minute. And then it says, "Ve'etz hachayim v'soch hagan, ve'etz hadas tovara." In addition to all the other trees, there is betoch hagan. So Chazal and betoch hagan means in the middle there were two trees. One is called the Eitz HaChayim. Right? Actually, interestingly, since all the problems subsequently revolve around the Eitz HaDa'at, we tend to forget about the existence of the Eitz HaChayim. But actually, if you look in Chazal had a Maseira that the Eitz HaChayim was actually a source of life, and life here meaning eternal life, and actually Eitz HaChayim was a source of knowledge. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Adam and Chava certain knowledge. And this is just generally an interesting topic, which the Mepharshim speak about, that it's not reasonable to think that God would have created Adam and Eve and not given them any Torah, any wisdom, any instructions of any sort. Just told them work it out from first principles, right? He gave them a body of knowledge. But of course, this is many centuries, millennia before Matan Torah. So he doesn't give them the Torah as we know it. But nevertheless, Chazal say that the Torah, the essence of the Torah, already existed pre Bereshis bara Elokim. The essence of the Torah already existed in a certain sense, if we can use the metaphor, sort of in God's mind. God already had within his mind, so to speak, the values and the meanings of the Torah before he even created the world. Right? And that's a Gemara in Nedarim. We learned it recently in Daf Yomi, and actually it already exists in Pesachim, Daf Nodalad. But the idea that there were 7 things were created before Bereshis bara Elokim, meaning there were 7 things God had, so to speak, Kaviyachol, in his mind when he created the world. And one of them was the Torah. So there was already the values of the Torah, the emes of the Torah, the instructions of the Torah already existed pre-Bereshis. So clearly, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates Adam and Chava, he must have given them some instructions. And these instructions are referred to by Chazal as the Eitz HaChai. And in fact, later on, it's interesting that in Mishlei, right, when the author of Mishlei, Shlomo HaMelech, speaks about the Torah, he says how wonderful the Torah is, and then he says, Eitz Chayim hi lamachazikim ba, v'temecheha me'usha, right, that the Torah is an Eitz HaChayim. So the word Eitz HaChayim, and we use the word Eitz HaChayim to refer to the Sefer Torah, right? Isn't that right? What is the Eitz HaChayim? The Eitz HaChayim is used, I think, is a phrase used to refer to the wooden handles. Yes, that's right. Shirley's doing Haggadah for us. The wooden handles by which we lift up the Sefer Torah are referred to colloquially as the Eitz HaChayim, which is a beautiful metaphor, because it brings us back to Gan Eden. That's where the Eitz HaChayim originally was, and the Eitz HaChayim in Mishlei of the Eitz Chayim hi lemachazikim ba. But that's clear that Adam HaRishon was given some sort of knowledge. According to the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Adam HaRishon was given the Sheva mitzvos b'nei Noach. Not exactly, actually. He was given 6 out of the 7 mitzvos b'nei Noach. 6 of them he was given already from day 1. He was given a basic moral code of the 7 Noachide laws. Anybody know which one he wasn't given? Of the 7 Noachide laws, this is a difficult question. Of the 7 Noachide laws, one of them wasn't relevant to Adam and Chava, and was only given to Noach, and that's why these are called the 7 Noachide laws. Why are they not called the 7 Adam's laws?
Eva Minachai.
Eva Minachai, very good. Why was it not relevant? Who said that? Hello?
Henry.
Henry. Well done, Henry. Why is it that
Because he didn't eat animals. The animals were not as such as yet given to mankind.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Henry. Thank you very much. You've done your homework, right? That Adam and Chava, before Noach, Adam and Eve were vegetarians, and they weren't eating meat at all. So the 7th of the commandments, which is not to eat a limb from a living animal, Eva Menachai, wasn't relevant to them because they weren't eating meat anyway. But all the other 6 of the 7 Noachide laws, right, the laws against violence and theft and robbery and adultery and all these things, right, and a belief in God and a civil law, all the other Noachide laws were already given, says the Gemara in Sanhedrin, were given to Adam and Eve. Is there a hook to hang that on? Where do we find a reference to something in the Adam and Eve story which could be interpreted to mean a body of knowledge? And the answer is Eitz HaChayim. Eitz HaChayim is the original primal knowledge, the primal Torah that was given to Adam and Chava, which contained all sorts of knowledge. If you read the more Kabbalistic commentaries, like the Orach Chaim HaKadosh and others, they will tell you that the Eitz HaChayim included a whole body of Kabbalistic knowledge about the creation. Probably one of the earliest books of Kabbalah, which predates even the Zohar, is a book called Sefer HaYetzirah, the Book of Creation. And the Book of Creation goes through the Hebrew alphabet and spells out how HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world using the Hebrew alphabet, whatever that means. I'm not quite sure what that means, but Kabbalistically, the Hebrew alphabet contains within it certain powers of creation, and all this is part of the Eitz HaChayim. And in fact, when the Arizal 500 years ago came to write down his Kabbalistic doctrines, or more correctly, when his Talmidim wrote them down and published them. The first book, the most important book of the Arizal, is called the Eitz HaChaim. He uses this phrase Eitz HaChaim to mean fundamental Kabbalistic ideas. So here we have it. That Adam and Chava are in the Gan Eden, right? And there are two trees there. One is the Eitz HaChaim, which is Kulei Teiv, which is all only about spiritual inspiration. But then there is the Eitz HaDa'at. Go back to the Pasuk again. And then the Pasuk says that you have the Eitz HaDa'at Tov V'Ra. The tree of good and bad. Of knowing good and bad. That knowing good and bad was something in some way. This raises an important question. I mean, surely Adam and Chava knew about good and bad before they ate from the forbidden fruit. I mean, we discussed at some length the whole idea of Adam and Eve being created, but Tselem Elokim. Tselem Elokim clearly implies intellect and moral judgments and spiritual judgments and Bechira. All that is part of Tselem Elokim. So why would they need the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra? So I just want to share with you a little bit. This is something we're going to be looking at a bit more in detail next week. But this is an extremely fundamental principle in Sefer Bereshis and in Torah Hashkafa. The idea of the Eitz Hadas and what went wrong there. Maybe we'll just, before we look at the Ramban, maybe I'll just let's read a few more psukim just to finish off this shir, and next week we'll have a closer look at the Ramban. The pasuk says, "Vayikach Hashem Elokim es ha'adam v'yanicheu b'gan Eden la'avda u'lashamra." To look after Gan Eden, la'avda u'lashamra. That's very interesting. Now, he's in Gan Eden, but he's not doing nothing. His job is la'avda, to work it. Excuse me. La'avda, to work the land, so to speak, or l'shamra, and to preserve it. But it's a bit odd that, because it's only when he's thrown out of Gan Eden is he told, B'zeas apecha tocha lechem. That's when he has to work physical agricultural labor. So here, la'avda l'shamra must mean something slightly different, right? And again, in Chazal, they understand that la'avda and l'shamra are two different words referring to, if you like, the mitzvahs, the commandments HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him in the Eitz HaChaim, that la'avda means mitzvahs asay, right? As we say in the Torah, right? La'avdoi, to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be an Eved Hashem is mitzvahs asay, or l'shamra, Shemira always refers to mitzvot lotas, prohibitions. So la'avda l'shamra means to pursue the positive commandments and to keep away from the prohibitions. That's la'avda l'shamra. More about that later on. And then the pasuk says like this: "Vayitzav Hashem Elokim es al ha'adam leimo mikol eitz hagan ochal tocha." You're allowed to eat from all the fruit of the trees, except Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra lo tochal mimenu. You're not allowed to eat from the Eitz Hadas, right? And then he says, "B'yom acholcho mimenu most tomos." So the day you eat from the Eitz Hadas, you will die. And what does that mean? Because actually it didn't happen, did it? They did eat from the Eitz Hadas, and they didn't literally die on that day. So we'll look at that a bit more closely. It's interesting, it's sometimes noted, I think slightly, maybe tongue-in-cheek, that what's the very first commandment God gives to Adam and Eve? The very first commandment is eat. Eat. Maybe that's the source of the Jewish involvement in eating, right? Jewish people are committed, I think, deeply, psychologically, pathologically almost, to being surrounded by eating. Doesn't matter when and where and how, we're either eating or we're fasting. But if we're not fasting, we're certainly eating. And even when we're fasting, we're eating massive amounts beforehand and massive amounts afterwards. And eating remains, if you like, a sort of a central feature. Nobody eats with such passion as the Jewish people eat. Exactly why that is, it has been pointed out, as I say, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, that according to the Torah, look at this pasuk highlighted on your screen. It's the very first commandment ever given to Adam and Chava, which is Mikol eitz hagan ochal toch. Eat from all the fruit of the tree. Eat. And this is considered to be a worthwhile activity and one of the reasons why we're put into this world, in order to eat. And then, of course, when it comes to eating, there are 1,000 different halachas about what's kosher and what's treif and what's meat and milk and ingredients and making brachas before, brachas afterwards. The amount of halachas surrounding eating is phenomenal. But eating correctly, the correct amounts of the correct type of food with the correct brachas before and afterwards is considered to be part of Avodas Hashem, part of the way we serve God. And that has its roots already in the very first commandment given to Adam and Chava in Bereshis chapter 2. You must eat from the fruit of the tree. And that is the initial, that's the mitzvah's aseh. But the mitzvah's lo saseh famously is ume'etz hadas tov v'ra lo tochal mimeh. But this tree of knowledge, good and evil, you mustn't eat from it. You must not eat from it. And this is really the origin of the forbidden fruit. And this is what happens. Chava does eat from the forbidden fruit, and that is the beginning of the being exiled from Gan Eden, as we find out. But there's an interesting line here in the Ramban, and with this I'll finish for today. So the Ramban writes, "Va'yofo ba'einai." He says, it seems to me, when he's learning these psukim, and of course when the Ramban says "Va'yofo ba'einai," he means I don't really have a proof for this, but this is what it looks like to me. Ki ha'odam ha'ya'oseh b'tivro masher ro'i lases. That the human beings, before eating from the Eitz Hadas, they had beteva, they had a natural, intuitive understanding of what was right and what was wrong. They understood it intuitively. They didn't need to figure it out. They didn't need to work it out. They understood exactly what was the correct way to live and what was a destructive way to live, what was mutter, what was asa. He did beteva. He did it naturally. That's a very interesting line in the Ramban, right? He says, in his teva, masheroi lases, kafia told him. And he was doing it according to his nature. Kasha yasu hashamayim, v'chol tzavrom, poli emeshe polosom emes, like nature does. Yeshano is tafkidam. And they weren't changed. In other words, the laws of gravity and the laws of biology and the laws of physics and chemistry, they work like clockwork. And similarly, Adam and Chava did the right thing in life like clockwork. And they weren't driven by love or hatred. In other words, pre-Eitz Hadas, the human being was simply tuned into the MS with such clarity that he knew intuitively, immediately what was good and what was bad and what was right and what was wrong. He didn't have any great passion for what was right or any hatred of what was wrong. He didn't have ava or sinah. He just knew, he was just in a sense attuned to the spiritual and moral values of this world, and that's how he lived. But somehow this forbidden fruit, what effect did it have? The pri ha'ilon, it wasn't the before. Sometimes people mistakenly think that Adam and Eve, before they ate from the tree of knowledge, had no knowledge. So he's saying no, exactly the opposite is true. And with this, he's following the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. Rambam says clearly, Adam and Rishon were created with the Tzelem Elokim. They had perfect knowledge beforehand. Their knowledge was perfect. It wasn't confused and it wasn't relative. and it wasn't dependent on emotion. It was absolute clarity. They knew b'teva what was right and what was wrong, and they functioned like clockwork, like the laws of nature. The Pri Ha'olam changed human nature in such a way that they were subject to human desires and human feelings, and there was no longer any clarity. It was tov v'ra. The good and the evil were, in a sense, mixed up, and they needed das. They needed to figure out what was right and what was wrong, and they sometimes got it right and sometimes got it wrong. But in actual fact, the whole process of understanding how to live was radically changed by eating from the forbidden fruit. More about that, ladies and gentlemen, next week. We'll look at that a bit more closely. But this is a fascinating topic, which goes right to the heart of human bechira, human knowledge, and human abilities. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Very nice to see you all. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you to see you. Nice to see you all, Henry and George and Shirley, Michael Gross. Nice to see you all, and Eliana, of course. Nice to see you.